My name is Kayla, and until last week, I thought I was a daughter and a sister. I was wrong. I was 23 years old, a fresh environmental engineering graduate, and a full-time unpaid convenience. My family didn't see a person when they looked at me. They saw a safety net they could trample on whenever they felt like stretching their legs. I was standing in our home office in San Francisco, the air heavy with the scent of expensive floor wax and the lingering smell of my sister's morning espresso. I was flipping my passport open and closed, staring at the fresh, crisp pages. My heart was thumping a steady rhythm against my ribs, the sound of a countdown. I wasn't just looking at a travel document. I was looking at my exit strategy. Tucked inside was a printed confirmation for my 10-year work visa. I'd spent months quietly negotiating a position with a top-tier firm in Tokyo, a dream that felt so close I could almost taste the salt air of the Pacific and the neon energy of Shinjuku. I was thinking about my flight, about the one-way ticket I'd bought with every cent of the $12,000 I'd scraped together from 3 different part-time jobs. I was imagining a life where my schedule didn't belong to someone else. And then the door clicked. My sister, Emily, stepped out of the hallway bathroom and blocked my path. She didn't say a word at first. She just stood there in her designer power suit, looking at me with a cold, analytical gaze. She saw the passport. She saw the spark of hope in my eyes. And that was enough to make her decide I'd had too much. Before I could even process her movement, she snatched the passport out of my hand. Her movements were clinical. She didn't hesitate. She didn't scream. She just walked over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder sitting on the desk, the one she used for her high-stakes financial documents. I moved to stop her, my voice catching in my throat, but she was faster. She fed my passport, my 10-year visa, and my entire future into the machine. The sound was a low, mechanical growl, a harsh, rhythmic grinding as the blades turned my dreams into uniform strips of blue and white confetti. She didn't even blink as the last of the cover disappeared into the bin. Then she turned, looked me right in the eye, and let a slow, jagged little smirk tug at the corner of her mouth. "There is no trip, Kayla," she said, her voice like ice water. "Your job is staying home with Jacob. I have a career. You have a responsibility to this family." From the kitchen, my mother, Sarah, didn't even bother to turn around from the sink. She just called out, her tone as casual as if she were agreeing with a weather report. "Exactly. You should stay, honey. Family comes first." From the living room, I heard a ripple of laughter. My father and my brother-in-law were watching a game, and they clearly thought the whole performance was a masterstroke of humor. They didn't see a crime. They saw a funny way to keep the help from quitting. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Like your entire worth was measured only by how much you could do for people who wouldn't do a thing for you? Let me know your story down in the comments. I'd love to know who is part of our community. I stood there on the polished hardwood, my hands empty and my chest feeling like it had been hollowed out. My flight was paid for. My apartment in Tokyo was waiting. And I was standing in the ruins of my identity. In that moment, the ledger of our relationship finally balanced out to 0. I realized that to them, I wasn't a grown woman or a professional. I was a subscription service they'd overdrawn for years. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even raise my voice. I watched the shredder finish its cycle, grabbed my backpack, and walked out of that house without saying a single word. They thought the silence meant I'd surrendered. They had no idea that the grinding of that machine was actually the sound of their lives starting to unravel. I walked down the driveway of my parents' house, the cool, damp fog clinging to my face like a shroud. I didn't look back at the bay window where I knew Emily was probably still standing, wearing that same jagged smirk. My footsteps on the pavement were the only sound in the quiet neighborhood. They were steady. They were rhythmic. They were the sound of a silent investor finally pulling her capital out of a failing venture. For years, I had been the glue holding their lives together, and they had mistaken my silence for a lack of options. They thought that by shredding a book of paper, they had tethered me to the ground. They were thinking in analog, while I had already moved to digital. I reached the corner and hopped on the bus, my backpack heavy with the only things that mattered, my laptop and my dignity. As the city lights blurred past the window, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Most people in my position would be hyperventilating. I didn't feel any of that. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single ounce of regret or sadness, but there was only a balance sheet in my head. I had spent 4 years paying into a family subscription that provided zero value in return. It was time to hit cancel. I arrived at my friend's place, a quiet studio in a part of the city my parents never visited. I sat down and opened my laptop. The screen glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. It was 11:51 p.m. My sister's world was still intact. Emily was a financial wizard at her firm, but I was the one who had spent the last 2 years building her proprietary analysis system. I was the one who had written the scripts that cleaned her data. I was the one who had built the dashboards that made her look like a genius in front of the board of directors. I had done it all for free, because sisters help each other. Now, I realized that my compassion had been a luxury they had overdrawn for years. My fingers moved across the keys with lethal precision. This wasn't a breakdown. This was accounting. At exactly 11:59 p.m., I accessed the private server where all her work files were hosted, the ones I maintained. I didn't delete them. Instead, I simply revoked all administrative access. I changed the encryption keys. I triggered a security lockout that only my biometric data could override. By 12:00 to 3 a.m., the system Emily relied on for her 9 a.m. presentation was a black box. She wouldn't be able to open a single spreadsheet. I had just reclaimed my intellectual property. Then, I opened a hidden folder on my cloud drive. I stared at the file labeled Travel Documents Backup. Emily thought she had destroyed my trip when she fed that passport into the shredder. What she didn't know, what she never bothered to learn about me, was that I had applied for a second passport months ago as a contingency. I also had a dual citizenship through my grandmother that she always conveniently forgot about. I looked at the digital copy of my electronic visa for Japan. It was still valid. It was still there. I wasn't just a girl with a shredded passport. I was a woman with a plan and the technical skill to execute it. I opened a file I'd been keeping for a long time, a spreadsheet labeled The Cost of Loyalty. This wasn't a trip down memory lane. It was an audit. The math was undeniable. I had spent 1,460 days as their on-call staff. That is 4 years of Kayla, Jacob needs a bath, and Kayla, I'm too exhausted to parent today. If I had billed Emily at the market rate of $25 an hour for the 30 hours of childcare I provided every single week, she would owe me $156,000. Instead, I got You're home anyway and motherhood is a sacrifice. It wasn't just my time. 2 years ago, my father, William, got himself into a mess with a bad investment. He was $5,000 short on a payment that could have cost him his house. I didn't hesitate. I used my entire internship bonus money meant for my tuition to clear his debt. He didn't thank me. He just took the money and asked if I'd finish the laundry. As I scrolled through the record of Emily's texts, the entitlement was staggering. Jacob is crying. Be here in 10, she'd write while I was in the middle of a lab. The free rent they always threw in my face was actually the most expensive subscription I'd ever signed up for. I kept wondering why I hadn't walked away sooner. From the outside, it looks like weakness, but on the inside, it's a prison without bars. Psychologists call it learned helplessness. It's a psychological chain that tightens every time you're told that your only value is your utility. When you are raised to believe that family loyalty is a one-way street, where you provide the paving and they drive the car, you start to believe the cage is your natural habitat. I wasn't staying because I was weak. I was staying because they had spent 23 years teaching me that my wings were just for show. The shredding of my passport wasn't the first act of violence they committed against my future. It was just the loudest. They had been shredding my identity bit by bit for years. They didn't realize that by destroying the last physical link I had to that house, they had finally broken the invisible chains of the survivor. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the silence of my phone was replaced by a digital seismic event. I was sitting in a sun-drenched corner of a local library, a fresh cup of black coffee steaming beside me. The first wave of calls started at 9:15. Emily Henderson. I didn't answer. At 9:20, the texts began. Kayla, the server is down. Fix it now. 5 minutes later, I have a board meeting in 30 minutes. This isn't funny. Unlock the files. I watched the arrival of these messages with clinical detachment. By 10 a.m., the battle shifted to the public arena. Emily posted a photo on Facebook, a vintage picture of us as children. The caption was a masterpiece of gaslighting. It breaks my heart when the people you've sacrificed everything for decide to turn their backs on family. Some people forget who raised them. Then came the call from my mother, Sarah. I picked up on the third ring. Kayla, what have you done to your sister? She is at her office, in tears, because of some glitch you caused. It wasn't a glitch, Mom, I said, my voice steady. It was a termination of service. I no longer live under your roof, so I am no longer providing free technical support or childcare. We are your family. We gave you a home. You are being vindictive and cruel over a small disagreement. Destroying a federal document and a 10-year work visa isn't a disagreement, Mom. It's a crime, I replied. And if Emily wants her data back, she can hire a consultant at $400 an hour, but it won't be me. You are dead to this family if you don't fix this by noon, she screamed before hanging up. I didn't cry. This wasn't a family crisis. It was an exit interview. I closed the call log and dialed a different number. Grace. She was a sharp, methodical attorney. We met 2 hours later. I laid out the facts. The shredded passport, the receipts for the $12,000 trip, the logs of the 4 years of childcare, and the proof that I owned the code Emily was using for her job. By 3 p.m., a formal legal notice was drafted and hand-delivered to Emily's office and my parents' home. It demanded $12,000 in restitution and the immediate return of $35,000 in educational funds that my parents had promised me, but had instead funneled into Emily's mortgage payments. I wasn't just asking for an apology. I was initiating a systematic, professional escalation. I wasn't the dramatic daughter anymore. I was a creditor, and the interest on their debt had just gone up. Grace and I sat together, digging through the accounts to trace that $35,000. Grace stopped clicking and leaned in closer to the screen. The silence changed. It went from methodical to sharp. Kayla, Grace said, her voice dropping. We found the mismatch. End quote. Over the last 18 months, exactly $150,000 had been drained from my parents' primary retirement account, the one my father, William, had spent 40 years of overtime shifts building. The transactions weren't listed as gifts. They were marked as investment reallocations. Grace zoomed in on the signature line. It was my father's name, written in his characteristic shaky script. But next to it, Grace pulled up a verified sample of his signature. The slant was wrong. The pressure on the pen was too consistent. This isn't a mismatch, Kayla, Grace said. This is a forgery. These funds weren't funneled. They were hijacked. I stared at the monitor. Emily, the financial wizard, hadn't just been accepting handouts. She had been bleeding our parents dry to fund her high-stakes lifestyle and cover her losses in risky Bitcoin investments. She was a vampire who had convinced the donors she was just a guest. This was the kill shot. This was the criminal twist that removed any remaining path to redemption for Emily. My sister wasn't just selfish or stressed. She was a criminal who had stolen her parents' past while trying to flush my future down the toilet. My father thought he was broke because of a bad market. He was actually broke because of the daughter he had chosen to support over me. The logins for these authorizations all came from a static IP registered to Emily's home office, Grace confirmed. The same office where she destroyed your passport. File the criminal report, Grace, I said, and send a copy of these documents to my father. It's time he sees the true cost of his favoritism. The grinding of the shredder from a few days ago echoed in my head, but it didn't sound like a threat anymore. It sounded like a confession. Emily thought she had trapped me. She didn't realize she had just handed me the keys to her prison cell. 48 hours later, the silence was finally broken by a different kind of sound. The frantic, heavy pounding of someone who had run out of exit strategies. Emily was at the door, and she was out of magic. I opened the door and maintained a clinical distance. Emily stood there, but the woman in the designer power suit was gone. Her hair was a mess. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was clutching a cardboard box of office supplies like a life raft. She looked brittle and hollow. "Kayla, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The firm, they walked me out this morning. Someone sent the logs to HR. They called it gross professional misconduct and data theft. They're talking about an industry-wide blackball." I leaned against the doorframe, watching her with the detachment of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt account. I had sent those logs to her HR department the same hour I left. If she wanted to claim my genius as her own, she had to accept the consequences when the source code was withdrawn. "That sounds like a professional matter, Emily," I said quietly. "Why are you here?" "Dad called me," she sobbed, dropping the box on the floor. "He saw the bank records. He saw the withdrawal slips. He's at the police station right now with Mom. They're filing the forgery charges. Kayla, if you don't talk to them, if you don't drop the civil suit, the district attorney will use it to prove a pattern of behavior. I'll go to prison." She reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back. This was the peak of the power flip. The sister who had smirked while shredding my future was now a beggar at my doorstep. As I watched her crumble, I realized something clinical about the woman standing before me. This was the illusion of power from an empty wallet. For years, Emily had built her authority on a foundation of stolen capital. She thought she was superior because she had the house, the job, and the golden status. But her position was just a shell rented with our parents' retirement and my unpaid labor. Now that the source of that wealth was gone, she had no internal value to stand on. Her power wasn't a character trait. It was a subscription service that had just been canceled. "Kayla, we're family," she pleaded. "Do something. Help me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. It wasn't a legal waiver. It was my new one-way flight confirmation to Tokyo. "You told me to remember my place, Emily," I said, my tone cold and factual. "I finally do. My place is at a top-tier engineering firm in Japan, starting a life where no one can touch my wings. Your place is answering for the $150,000 you stole from the people who raised you." I handed her a printed copy of the criminal filing Grace had prepared. I already did something. I balanced the books. "You're choosing a job over your own sister?" she shrieked. "I'm choosing what's right," I replied. "And what's right is not rewarding a vampire for a grinding sound in a shredder. My place is in Japan. Yours is behind bars." I stepped back and closed the door. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a factory reset. The legal fallout was swift and decisive. Emily didn't end up behind bars, but she might as well have. She received a suspended sentence and a court order to repay the $150,000 she had forged from our parents' retirement fund. Without her high-paying job or her professional reputation, she's now working 2 low-level retail shifts just to make the monthly restitution payments. Her life of designer suits and financial wizardry has been replaced by a uniform and a bus pass. My parents, Sarah and William, are living in a quiet house that feels much too large for them now. My father finally understands that the daughter he chose to support was the one who stole his future, while the daughter he overlooked was the one who tried to save it. They tried to call me a few times before I left, their voices sounding small and uncertain, but I didn't answer. I've realized that family isn't a free pass to break someone, and shared blood doesn't give anyone the right to flush your future down the toilet. I am currently sitting at San Francisco International Airport, the terminal buzzing with the energy of thousands of people heading toward their own new beginnings. The air here smells like jet fuel and overpriced coffee, and to me it smells like victory. I reached into my backpack and pulled out my new passport. I flipped it open to the page with my Japanese work visa. The stamp is bright, red, and permanent, a physical symbol of the fact that no one can touch my wings anymore. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the runway, watching a massive jet lift off and disappear into the clouds. My flight to Tokyo departs in 40 minutes. I am 23 years old, I am an engineer, and for the first time in my life, I am the protagonist of my own story. I deleted the old family group chats and blocked the numbers that only called when they needed something. This isn't a breakdown, it's a factory reset. To anyone listening who feels like they are always the secondary character in their own family, I have a message for you. For a long time, I believed that my value was only measured by how much I could do for people who wouldn't do a thing for me. I thought that saying no made me selfish. But I've learned that the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and sometimes even for them, is to set a boundary and mean it. You are allowed to have dreams that don't revolve around other people's comfort. You are allowed to take your capital out of relationships that are ethically bankrupt. If the only way someone knows how to keep you close is by shredding your future, then the bravest thing you can do is step back, rebuild, and learn to fly anyway. You don't need their permission to be luminous. My flight is boarding now. I'm leaving behind the unpaid nanny and the girl who is part of the furniture. I'm heading toward a sunrise made of my own choices and my own hard work. I'm finally free. If this story helped you realize that it is never too late to reclaim your worth, please hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear these words. Don't let anyone destroy your passport to the future. Subscribe so you don't miss our next journey into justice. You deserve to shine brighter than anything they tried to take away.